Can we all talk about Father Mike Schmitz? I showed him to a girlfriend who's not Catholic, and she's like, when's Mass?
What about the man needing sex? That's just a cultural narrative that basically says men are like animals and they have to be able to do this sexual thing. Otherwise, they're going to go crazy. And the reality is there's whole vocations that are celibate. And these are virile men, men's men. Some of the most masculine of men I know are priests. We need food. We need air to breathe. We don't need sex.
It's a gift
of coming together, and it's designed to bring life into the world.
I think the sexiest thing about a guy is like their self-control. And my husband has amazing self-control. So after baby number 4, when we started practicing NFP, it was like we couldn't do it sometimes when we wanted to. And that kind of made things a little steamier, like not gonna lie. It's hard on him too, don't get me wrong. People will say, well, oh, do you just do other things for your husband?
Oh yeah, girl. When's Mass? I mean, did that not totally sound forced to anyone else? That some of the most masculine men they know are priests, and it's great for men don't need sex. Actually, the most masculine men do not actually. They're all priests. They all just take up the robes. You know, that's where all the real man's men are going. You know, nothing out there really gets a woman going like a man who just doesn't have any sex at all. You know, who's just completely celibate. You know what? Nothing's hotter than self-control, as that one woman said. All right, I'll stop clowning. For those of you who may not know, this is Lila Rose. She is an anti-abortion activist, and she's been blowing up on Twitter recently for this whole men don't need sex comment. Now, some people took this as her basically advocating for sexless marriages. That is kind of how it sounds to me, to be honest. She does walk her statements back, so we'll give her a fair hearing. But to me, this does seem like an example of the fact that there's kind of this weird feminist element in the mainstream anti-woke center-right, where you just have these women who still ultimately kind of hate men and want to punish them, but they're just framing it in a different way. And sure enough, Lila Rose is also one of those, you better, if a woman says she's come to Christ, you just have to accept what she says and look the other way. The sort of get out of jail free card, really, is what it is. And I'm not saying people can't change or people can't be transformed by Christ, or, but there's also like people weren't born yesterday, and it is a thing that women will say they found Jesus, and suddenly they're born again virgins or whatever. Like,
the amount of people that have sent me and my husband death threats, the amount of people who have sent my husband things from my past consistently week by week is like so hard for him to deal with. And then for me to be like ashamed about, because I'm constantly being reminded of the things I've done when I just want to live. I'm out of it now. I know I'm out of it, but yet I keep getting brought back to that.
Why do you think they want to punish you so much?
I don't quite know. I really can't wrap my head around it. I would never send anybody anything that was that hateful. Brittany Delamore, I'd never send her husband her old scenes. Even when I was in that industry doing darkness, I would never do that. In my mind, you're demon possessed, because that is so evil.
It's like, really? She can't wrap her head around why some people would hate her. When, I mean, this stuff is like ruined marriages. OF. People just, guys getting addicted and then like spending all this money and stuff. And, she's used her sexuality. I mean, whether it's right or wrong, I don't advocate for taking time out of your day to bother someone like this. I don't really think that's a productive use of your time, but it is something that she should feel shame over, right? It's a shameful thing. Like, it really just comes across as basically just demanding forgiveness rather than sincere reflection on how her actions have impacted other people's lives. But anyway, to tie that back into Lila, defending and platforming that woman Nala is really, it shows you what type of quote-unquote conservative she actually is. But anyways, there's more context which we will get into, where I guess she defends her statements. So we'll look into that later and make the judgment if that's actually what she's saying or not. But personally, I thought this just seemed like a sort of purity culture thing gone awry, where Lila has a very particular view of human sexuality, which is popular in some conservative leaning Catholic schools of thought, and she's basically trying to justify this and or promote it, really. And it just came across as terrible. But anyways, let's dive into Lila defending her statements. There was a big reaction to this all over Twitter, and this is her kind of going over it and responding to it.
Hey, everybody. You may have seen this recent viral clip about Father Mike Schmitz and about the idea that men do not need sex. Let's take a look.
It's hard on him too. Don't get me wrong. People will say, well, oh, do you just do other things for your husband?
Now, this was a collage clip of moments from a conversation I had with Chrissy Horton, my very lovely guest here, a Catholic mom of 6, who's talking about NFP and about abstinence, periodic abstinence in marriage. We talk about chastity. We talk about the priestly vocation and the celibate vocation and a whole host of other topics. And the tweet that went viral leads with this. It says, men do not need sex. Our culture is so hypersexualized that the idea of a celibate priest leaves people in disbelief as if it's impossible. That's heartbreaking. Have we really forgotten that self-control and virtue are within reach?
It's not modern oversexed culture that causes people to be incredulous at the idea of someone just deciding that they don't want to have sex at all for the rest of their life. Like it's kind of an unnatural thing. It really is an unnatural choice. And it has been there have been problems with this for centuries. For instance, there was this reform group, if you will, within the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, I believe the 14th century, called the Lollards. And they had a list called the 12 Conclusions of the Lollards of 12 reasons, 12 ways they thought the Catholic Church needed to reform. And 2 of those ways had to do with the doctrine of clerical celibacy and the fact that it was literally too much of a burden for people to bear. And the first one, or the first objection regarding sexuality, I think it was number 3 in their list, was the fact that the requirement for clerical celibacy on men basically encouraged same-sex relations within the priesthood. And the second one, which was, I believe, number 11 in their list of 12, was that nuns were getting abortions to cover up the fact that they'd had relations with men. So trying to use the Catholic priesthood as an example of, celibacy being an easy choice to make for most people is very, very, very wrong. It is very warped. And I'm not even saying this to attack Catholics. I'm just pointing out there have been tensions in this requirement of celibacy, even in the priesthood, for centuries. It is not an easy road to go down. And to say that, like, oh man, the most masculine men are priests is I just can't even, I can't even wrap my head around why she would say this. But let's keep going.
Look at Jesus Christ. The most perfect man to ever walk the earth was celibate and sinless before he was crucified for our sins. Shouldn't he be the supreme model for manhood? Self-mastery, discipline, total self-gift, all out of love.
Yeah, but even he didn't just expect people to be celibate, right? Like the framing almost seems to suggest that sex itself is wrong inherently in some way, when God also gave the command to be fruitful and multiply. And, the reason people have sexual urges in the first place is in part to help them fulfill that command. And Jesus was also very clear. Celibacy is not for everyone. It's not the right choice for everyone.
Priests choose celibacy so their hearts can belong entirely to God, as St. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 7:32-35. I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. I say this for your own benefit, to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord.
Really weird that she would cite 1 Corinthians as evidence that people don't need sex. But really, this whole thing seems to be based around her desire to promote this natural family planning idea, I guess.
Abstinence isn't just for priests. intermittent abstinence can also be a beautiful practice within marriage if a couple has a serious reason to delay bringing a baby into the world. When practicing natural family planning, NFP, spouses can grow in self-mastery, deepen their love, and remain faithful to God's design for marriage. Christ is the model, love is the reason, holiness is the goal. So this post has generated a lot of attention, a lot of views. There have been thousands of comments. Many have been positive, who say, yes, these are very important messages to share about chastity, about periodic abstinence in marriage, NFP, about contraception is not the answer, etc. But there have been a lot of negative comments too, and I wanted to address some of those. The negative comments seem to be in maybe 3 buckets. One bucket, from what I've seen, is just straight up, just very crass, offensive, angry remarks about women in general, shouldn't be podcasting, or just, very derogatory comments, things like that.
All right, which one of you chuds left those comments? You better fess up and tell me.
Not going to even talk about that because that's just interneting. There are 2 other categories of critique that I've seen. One is about Father Mike Schmitz being included in the clip, and then another one is about the idea that no, men do not need sex. It's not a biological need the way that food, water, air is to breathe, whatever. It is not a need. And so I want to address both of these. First of all, on the topic of Father Mike Schmitz, there's been some comments saying this is sexualizing priests, and that this is sacrilegious, or this is evil or wrong, and this is inappropriate, etc. And I think it's really important to note that, of course, Chrissy, my lovely guest, her intention was in no way to be disrespectful or objectifying of priests or anyone.
Man, objectifying priests is not a sentence I ever thought I would hear come out of someone's mouth.
Francine, we've been driving for hours. Are we at the frozen yogurt place yet?
Actually, Stan, that was a trick. We're in Philadelphia. Take a look. Does this bring back any memories?
Oh, you want me to confront Father Roy about what happened at camp? Thing is, I'm not sure it was entirely his fault. I may have deserved it. In fact, I may have instigated it. Actually, Francine, I seduced him. I don't know why I wanted him, but I wanted him. There was no actual...
Stan, no! This isn't about that. This was...
I get not being crass or gross, but I do think that people's priorities are way off when they're concerned about improper comments rather than the massive degeneracy and just vileness that we see in our culture on a regular basis. Like, if you have time to be, I just find it ridiculous that some people have time to nitpick and be worried about things like that.
And of course, that was not my intention either. And the conversation about Father Mike Schmitz was in the context of the larger conversation about celibacy and abstinence periodically within marriage because of natural family planning and using NFP. And so for the full context, and anybody interested could go look at the full conversation that we had, I am talking about celibate priests and how they are truly masculine and manly men. It's not that they're less of men because they choose celibacy. And then Christy says, can we talk about Father Mike Schmitz as a great example of a truly manly, handsome, amazing priest who's out there definitely attracting people to his message through his person, through his personality, through his persona. I don't think any of that is something that is embarrassing to say or wrong to say. Now, if it came across in any way as improper or over the top, that is not the intention at all. Christy was referencing a friend of hers who was, I think, joking about how handsome Father Mike is. And I understand that that is a little bit in the gray area of, is that appropriate to do?
And I really think the fact she even mentioned this just goes to show you how out of touch some of the circles she's engaging with really are. Though it is pretty concerning that they both seem more turned on by this priest than their own husbands.
I think it was demonstrating a larger point that we were making, which is that being celibate does not make you less of a man or less of a woman, and that you don't need to act out on sexual desires or have a sexual relationship to be fully alive and to be fully living out your masculinity or femininity.
And if that was really your point, lady, you should be delivering that message to incels and to gross girls who get pumped and dumped on Tinder, and not to your right-wing populist audience.
And the other point was that men don't need sex. And there's whole accounts saying you want to deprive men in marriage of sex, you're a feminist, like very quite frankly, responding to something that is not what I said, inventing a position that I might have and then responding to that. That's called a straw man argument. When I say men don't need sex, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be celebrating sex in marriage, be very pro sex in marriage. If you look at my content, you'll see me often referencing the beauty of sex in marriage and the goodness of sex in marriage. But the reality is, in any marriage, there will be periods of time where you'll need to be apart sexually. There'll be postpartum periods for a mom who's just given birth. There'll be sickness, injury, or absence. Maybe someone's on a trip. And then there may be opportunities for practicing NFP because of a serious reason. And that would mean you are abstinent during at least the fertile window that the woman has.
Yeah, I told you guys about that weird NFP thing she keeps pushing. Anyways, let's buckle in again and see where she's going with this.
This is not something that we should shy away from talking about. This is not something that we should be embarrassed about. We should not say that this means sex is bad or shameful, or that we are against sex because we are talking about this or supporting it. And I think an underpinning truth here is that neither men nor women on any given day need to be sexually active or have sex.
In the sense that you won't literally die, like your head won't explode because you have blue balls, but again, expecting lifelong celibacy or very long periods of celibacy from just everyday people is not normal, is not really healthy.
Imagine if we said that to a single person. Oh, you need to have sex to be happy or to live. That's not true. We're condemning that single person to misery, and it's actually not true. God does not give you a moral path that's miserable that you can't follow. God gives us a moral path that's good for our flourishing. And sex belongs in marriage because sex is deeply unitive. It brings two people together. It bonds them for life. And it's incredibly procreative. It has the power for procreation. And that belongs within a marriage where there's a mother and a father who are married who can raise those children. And so to say that men don't need sex is a fact, as well as women don't need sex is a fact. And saying that does not mean that somehow this podcast or myself support men not and women not coming together in a marriage and having a beautiful, intimate life together. Of course they should do that.
I was just going to say, is this lady on the Daily Wire? She's totally on the Daily Wire. This whole thing has this very particular Catholic ideology taint to it, if you will. Has that kind of residue, the whole unitive, which is an unusual word for someone to just throw out there, and then followed by procreative, and then her also mentioning flourishing at the beginning of that last clip I showed you. I'm like, she kind of sounds like something Michael Knowles or Trent Horn would say. It also explains why some of the things she says just sound so totally out of touch, because even the overwhelming majority of Christians in this in America don't even oppose all forms of contraception. I mean, they'll say, yeah, sex outside marriage is wrong, but not, they aren't literally against using contraception even within marriage.
Remember, chastity is not just for people who are unmarried or celibate. Chastity is for married people. And what is chastity? Chastity is about loving the other person and seeing them as a gift, and you yourself are a gift to them, instead of I'm going to use you for my sexual pleasure. And so if you're entering marriage as a man or a woman to now I get to have sex whenever I want, however I want, wherever I want, that is not Christian marriage.
I find this whole thing kind of weird because her advice seems like it's directed at people, the few people who actually still do wait to have sex until marriage. And really, that's not such a common thing in the U.S. at all anymore. And it hasn't been for some time, even among people who identify as mainstream conservative, evangelical, or Catholic Christians. But the funny thing is, what's actually a much more common experience is that many Americans just aren't having sex at all. Like, they're completely sexless. It's very weird. It's very strange. We live in this age of sexual liberation, and people are more free than ever to do whatever they want, and in very public ways, sometimes very degenerate public ways. But overall, fewer people are actually even having sex. And I can't find it now, but there was actually a clip of Michael Knowles saying that it was better to be it's better for a man to be an incel who literally can't have sex than to be a man who is capable of having sex. And I'm like, that because then they'd be having sex outside of marriage, and then that would ultimately be worse according to their logic or their interpretation of biblical teaching. But the thing about an incel, and no disrespect to anyone who's having lady problems, I've definitely been there in the past. Never been an incel, but um, is the fact that there isn't a single one of them that isn't either depressed, has some other emotional or psychological issues, or is just generally like a bitter person. That they literally cannot, for some reason, form a relationship, a romantic relationship with a woman, even if they wanted to, even if they're trying. There is something probably wrong with you. And I'm not saying the dating market's easy or that there are a lot of appealing choices out there right now, but if you literally, for the life of you, can't not be a virgin, that implies an emotional, psychological, and spiritual condition, which is certainly lower than someone who is actually, than a man who actually is able to go out and have romantic and sexual relationships with women, even if they occur outside the context of a monogamous marriage. And, that you can say that that's wrong, that that's fornication, but then that I'm right, that, an incel is literally less psychologically and morally healthy than than a man who is actually confident enough in himself to form relationships with women.
Christian marriage is about dying to ourselves so we can love the other person. And that might include our passions or our immediate sexual drive or interests. And this doesn't mean we can't have an amazing, full, beautiful sex life with our spouse, but it just means that our sex life should be ordered towards the good of our spouse.
Paul also says not to deprive each other. And there are other very common issues, like, for instance, dead bedrooms. So it just kind of makes you wonder, like, why she's not talking about those situations, for instance. Like, that's a real problem people experience. But here, we're being told about how great it is for people to do chastity even in marriage.
And not use our spouse. Your sex life is not about your momentary sexual pleasure in that time, right? Your sex life is about loving your spouse and being loved by your spouse. And having that approach, I think, changes everything and is different from what the world's approach is, which is that sex is about my pleasure on my terms when I want it. So that's the distinction here that I think is so important and honestly is so beautiful, because it truly makes sex even more amazing and more meaningful. And I said this in the conversation with Christy. I said, here's my hot take. Couples that practice NFP, where they're deeply respectful and understanding of what sex actually is, unitive and procreative, those couples, I believe, have the best sex life. This is anecdotal, but they have the most intimacy, the most rewarding experiences of pleasure and joy together, because it is ordered towards ultimately love of each other and love of God. There it is, guys. I don't know that there's much more I can say at this time about that beyond everything I've been saying for years on these topics. All right. Thanks, guys. That's all for now. Catch me outside. Okay.
The overall vibe of watching this was just that it seemed very weird and cursed, and she has not convinced me that she doesn't have a dead bedroom with her husband right now. She's not beating those allegations, as mean as they might be. But anyway, that's just my opinion. Feel free to voice yours in the comment section below. Am I right? Am I wrong? Does the conservative movement, does the right have a feminist in trad clothing problem? I mean, the Daily Wire seems like ground zero for this, if we're being honest. That's my opinion. But anyways, hope you enjoyed the video, and Red Channels will catch you in the next one.